Galidor is a much maligned and divisive LEGO theme, so why not add to that division by ranking all the sets against each other? I'll be ranking the sets from worst to best based on their displayability, their accuracy to the show, usability in mocks, as well as their cultural significance to Galidor as a theme in general. To round at the bottom of the list, I'm putting all 5 of the Galidor McDonald's figures. I've done a separate video on those, so you can hear my full thoughts on that in that video. But essentially, these are the weakest of the Galidor line. They should be counted as gear, since they're technically a promotional item, but these are counted as sets. If I had to rank them, I'd probably say that Nepal is the worst of the 5. His parts are not super useful, odd colors, and doesn't look anything like the Nepal from the other series. The second worst being Euripides, which is also suffering from the same problem of not having the show-accurate stuff for some reason. Would have been good to at least have that feature in it. But the Euripides figure at least has some useful dark green parts, which could be used as foliage. But otherwise, it's also sort of weak and doesn't really look like the character at all. The Gorm figure at least somewhat resembles Gorm, but the lack of the purple really lets this one down. It's nice to have that little wasp feature that the deluxe figure has, but otherwise, maybe you could use the parts in a mock, but otherwise, what are you going to do with it? The Yens, I do think, has some potential. The fact that it uses the same color scheme and mechanical parts means you could combine it with the Yens figure well enough, and the staff is at least a bit more interesting. So it has one of the most useful parts out of the McDonald's figures. I do think Nick is the best of the 5, maybe just because it's so funny looking and it's had this whole infamy about it, but the character is so undeniably Galidor. The speckle black arm really is a nice touch, as well as the metallic silver on the paint. It's really weird looking, but there's just a lot more fun you can have with this figure. Maybe the Yens is more useful, but this one I just think is really funny, and that's why I think it's the best of those 5. Bricklink technically lists there to be 20 Galidor sets, since it counts the Galidor Defender Kit, which was a combo bundle of a Nick, Gorm, and a couple other promotional material. Doesn't really count as a set, but technically it's here. It's a good bundle pack of these 2 figures, but it's not like it has that much identity as a set on its own. The CD-ROM software it came with is very hard to find, but if you can find it, I'd be very interested to know what's on it. Out of the actual sets, I do think that the TDN module is actually the weakest. Even though it's got a really good presence to it and it uses that Galidor violet color very well, it's just a bit too big to be useful, especially the lack of proper joints. This module is gigantic. Like, if you put it next to a normal set, it is massive. It's the size of maybe a $200 or $250 set. It's huge. But for that size, you get very little for it, especially for how expensive it was when it came out. This one gigantic module piece is a very famous part, but it is hard to use it. Basically, your entire mock then has to be this part. Otherwise, if you use it as the actual toy itself, it's quite heavy and it's very easily scratched. You can see that the back and the front glass very prone to scratching, and I've only ever managed to find one of these that is not scratched other than a sealed copy. However, the thing feels durable, so it at least has that going for it, but otherwise, it's very hard to use this otherwise. And the worst feature of this is the fact that the joints are not the same Galidor ratchet joints. These rubber axles are much harder to use, and they don't work on anything outside of the module. These rubber joints themselves are really weird to put in, they don't fit well, and they always feels like they're going to break. I've had at least one of these break in the past before, and the ratchet joints are extremely sturdy in comparison. Both the wing and the leg could have been really good reuses in this set, as well as all that surface area that could have been used for more connection points. This could have been a really cool starter base plate of sorts for a much larger Galidor mock, but unfortunately it's so limited what you can do. As an actual vehicle playset, it's also very weak, with almost no detail on the inside. In the show, it has this TARDIS-like quality where there's more space on the inside, but you can barely fit one figure in here on its own. It fails in multiple ways, and even though it might look interesting and it might look accurate to the show, there's very little you can do with this part, and it takes up so much space. So I wouldn't recommend this if you're looking for a Galidor set to get. Unfortunately, next up is Allegra, one of the main characters of the TV series. The action figure of this character is a poor representation of the character in the show, with very limited parts and kind of weak design and odd proportions, as well as a weak accessory. In the show, this character is really interesting, and this figure just does not look like the actress, as even more than the Nick one doesn't look like Matthew Ewald. The Allegra figure could really use some more articulation, some more interesting accessories. The key whoop that it comes with never actually appeared in the show. This creature was just a part of the concept art and got left over in the final toy. This really could have been replaced with other parts or something else of interest. Because of that, this figure is not good for army building or for accumulating parts. Most of it is sort of awkward and blocky, difficult to use, and with the red color scheme and the dark blue, it's limited in what it can be used for. Unless, of course, you want a full herd of Kiwop. The dark grey part of the Kiwop could have been useful, but the orange makes it a little bit tougher to use. Also, it only has one attachment point. Allegra's parts are sort of a mixed bag. The arms being locked at the joints are a real letdown, but the hair connector is an interesting part. It also means that you can chain together heads using that attachment point on the back of her skull, which is really odd, but the hair connector is an interesting part. I'm sure a lot of people didn't even know that this was a separate part. It so seamlessly attaches to the Allegra, and it comes attached in the packaging. With one copy of Ernie and any of the Nick figures, you can actually turn those locked arms of Allegras into much more useful posable arms. This is really how the figure should have come. The locked arms are supposed to represent the kung fu sort of poses the character is known for, but a sort of chopping action feature like how the Bionicle figures had maybe might have made this more useful or interesting in that sort of way. The character can't glinch, so thinking of something else to be used as an accessory really could have brought this figure above. But with really odd looking proportions and unhelpful parts, that's why it's at the bottom of the list, even though the show's character is probably the most interesting in the TV show. The deluxe Galidor figures would have cost more than the standard ones at the time, but the Gorm Deluxe proves that it does not make them better. This figure is actually a step down from the standard Gorm, with the added features I think distracting from what makes the character interesting. This figure is more useful with those incredible attachment points at the back, meaning that you can do a lot more with the parts that you're given. However, I think the inclusion of the black wasp wings, which are made out of that flexible rubber material that tends to degrade, and the new gold prints on the front, are actually sort of taking away from the sleek black look of Gorm normally. Kind of reminds me of how they would make Darth Vader or Buzz Lightyear toys that had all these extra weird colors and features when they just look more interesting and look better as the standard versions. The wasp wings are made out of this odd material that tends to degrade over time. The rubber is still fine if you clean it properly, but it just tends to keep getting dusty and disgusting. And overall, I'd say that the gold print on it looks nice when lined up, but I still think that there's something impressive about the just black and purple color scheme of the original Gorm, and these extra parts tend to just distract from it. It's also hard to pose this in a way where it looks impressive compared to the standard Gorm, which you'll see later. The wasp wing projectile is just an odd part. At this right angle, you can press it and it has a pretty decent firing range, but it's just an odd inclusion, and I think the other projectile wings that Nick has are a much better projectile part. Overall, Gorm Deluxe could definitely use a couple more design tweaks, and I would have preferred a new original figure here instead of just another recolor. The basic Nepal figure would have been the most affordable at the time, and I think as a smaller entry to Galidor, it's a really good figure. I've also done a separate video on this in the past, but I'll say that with only 2 parts being reused, it's a really good recolor pack of Nepal parts, but it's actually the less accurate version of the 2 Nepal that were produced. Gripper arm is a good accessory, and I think overall this figure is pretty solid, but I really again would have preferred a new character here rather than another recolor of an existing figure, especially one where there's not much variation between this and the deluxe version that comes in Nepal and Schimmel. However, it's got some decent ideas for customization, and having a lot of these allows you to have a really good pool of parts to use. I definitely think that the white parts are more helpful, and the texture on these Nepal figures is really good. If you army build them, there is a potential to use them as Sectari warriors from the show. I could even see these being foot soldiers and the Nepal and Schimmel being sort of general in the army, which is actually used in the show. Overall then, it makes these more desirable to collect, and since it was the cheapest one, there's a better chance that you're going to be able to acquire a quantity of them. However, I would have liked to see it include the show-accurate staff, which is important for the character. Despite being the rarest Galidor figure that actually got released, the Aquart is somewhat middle of the road. It's a good representation of the character in the show, which does look like a guy in a rubber suit, but otherwise it does look like the character and it's instantly recognizable. It definitely stands out with some interesting paint choices and parts. The parts are a very particular shade of orange, which is quite rare, so you can really not use that sort of much other than the aqua art. But that being said, the parts themselves are of good quality. The suction cup I wish extended out further, but the fact that it actually does work somewhat as a suction cup is interesting. More useful connection points on the torso or other parts could have been useful as well. These also work well for army building, since this is a race of people in the show, and they actually do look good as a collective. I definitely think that if this was a more widely released set, this would have been an excellent set to army build as the generic bad guys for the show's characters. It's a shame that it did get such a limited release, because it is actually better than a few of the sets that did get a full initial release. The existence of the Deluxe Nick actually is more warranted than the Gorm Deluxe, since this character appears in the show as Evil Nick.
Come on, Mickey. Time to go home.
Nick, at least let me explain. Maybe later.
The medium violet and violet color scheme on this color is very Galidor. It's a color that you don't see much outside of the theme at all. I definitely think that the addition of the wings, projectiles, and map as accessories are really good. It would have been good to have the backpack as well for the deluxe figure, but otherwise you get a good amount of stuff with it. Despite collecting for a few years, I still haven't found a copy of the map. It's a small light blue piece that connects into the arm pieces, which is a good accessory to include somewhere, and would have also been in the Mokar set if it had been released. Overall, this is a really solid figure and a good part of the wave. The Keck Powerizer is such an interesting part of the history of Galidor. This really bizarre and ambitious multimedia toy is almost like its own game console in itself. It sort of works like a mini Game Boy, having 21 games that you can play. Very simple ones, some of which work, some of which don't work so well, but all of them are an interesting look at how they tried to connect the TV show to the toys.
Fire up! Welding! It's no use resisting.
This is a figure that benefits from having multiple of them. The figures can actually talk to each other, as well as with the TV show, the video game, and otherwise the figure parts are somewhat limited. The arms can't really be used on anything else, and if you try to insert other parts into the arm sockets, it might damage the electronics inside. The usability of the Jens and Gorm head really could have been expanded, maybe giving other characters' heads voice lines, but ultimately the hardware at the time is what limited it. You can see that the Super Mario, which is about a similar size, has so much more functionality for the same space. Maybe it was a good idea, but it was ahead of its time. But otherwise, the parts of this figure are really limited to almost just the Keck Powerizer. The minigames are interesting in some of the functionality, but ultimately it's an unwieldy toy, and it doesn't really work well as a game console or as an action figure, so it's somewhat limited in what you can do with it. However, the history and the interestingness of this figure is what makes it one of the more interesting ones to me, other than just the recolors that were earlier on the list. If you take a deep dive into what this figure was meant to be and what it can connect to, it really shows that this might have had the most effort and thought put into it. Euripides is a really solid figure. It's got a good design and overall is very accurate to the show. If anything, it looks better than the rubber suit guy that they have doing the Euripides. The staff is probably one of the strongest parts of the character. It's really good and ties together the character's aesthetic well, and it's from the TV show. The staff itself is made using a gold paint on the translucent red part. Unfortunately, this does tend to chip kind of bad. Out of the three I have, one of them has that sort of damage that you can see on it. Also, because it has no LEGO logo markings or anything else saying that it's even Galidor themed, it means that it's often missing. Out of all of the Euripides figures I have, only 3 actually have the staffs. While I don't think it's the best character to army build, he is from a certain race of frog-like people, so you probably could do something with it. I also think that the parts itself are kind of useful, and it is a really strong figure overall. The dark green parts can easily be used as foliage integrated deeply into a build, and the extra point of articulation on the top of Euripides' head is an interesting design choice that's actually left over from when the figure was initially designed to have the ponytail. You can see this in the McDonald's version, but this figure was always meant to have the Allegro ponytail connector as part of the back of the head. But they removed it last minute, and that's why the entire thing was scrapped. But it means that you still have that really useful attachment point, just like the Allegro figure has, right on the top of its head. I'm not a fan of the design of the torso and the armor piece. The armor piece never really feels like it sits properly on the figure, and there's not really a way you can force it on where it feels like it's going on well. The entire torso piece is kind of big and cumbersome, and it doesn't have any other connection points on it, which really could have made it a lot better. Overall, the Euripides figure is pretty decent, and it's got a really strong character design, which I think takes it above the line and beats out figures like the Aqua, even though really there's not that much to it otherwise. I definitely think it's one of the strongest alien characters in the show. As the main antagonist of the show, I think the Gorm figure is a really good representation of the villain, and a very solid action figure overall. The Gorm figure's sleek black look works really well for it, and I do think you can get some much better poses than the deluxe figure because of that grasping hand piece. While there's less to it overall, I think less is more with this one, and the extra attachment points means it's very likely that all the parts will be there, the extra arms, or whatever. This means it's very easy to find a complete figure. This is the highest quantity I've been able to achieve of any one Galidor figure, which is great because it's one of the better figures to have in quantity. They look really impressive as an army of Gorm, and I definitely think that it makes for a good villain against any of the hero characters that you might have. The extra attachment points make it very useful parts overall for mocks, and the purple is really impressive, and there are very few LEGO parts that have purple in this sort of size. Overall, the smaller part selection is good for the price. The sleek black parts are more useful than you'd think for other mocks. If you have 4 of the Gorm figure, you can make this type of mock. Those grasping hands really are one of the best of the non-mechanical parts that you can use for your own mocks in the series. As the main character of the series, the standard Nick Bluetooth figure is actually really solid. It needs to be, since this is going to be the one that should, in theory, be the most popular as the main character. The accessories are really good with this figure, the design is good representation of the character from the show, but ultimately the main letdown is the fact that they just couldn't get human faces looking that right back in 2002. The punching arm and backpack are accessories taken from the show, and they look well translated into the figure form. Ultimately, the parts in the Nick Bluetooth figure are somewhat useful with the dark blue and the nougat parts, and the glinching arm is perfect to go with any Yens or any other figure. The backpack is a really cool piece. It's often lost, but if you have it, it also fits the Allegro figure. It isn't too hard to acquire a Nick Bluetooth, and even if you have a few of them, it's very good for army building. You can use the nougat hands and head for a bunch of stuff. They're really weird and freaky parts, but they're just amazing for doing this kind of creepy Galidor mocks. As the main character of the show and the symbol of the theme, really, this is an important figure in it, and it's really a staple of what Galidor is fundamentally. Definitely one to get if you can get it. The Tager figure is a prominent character in the show and a really well-made set, which is why it's unfortunate that it's so hard to find it. This was part of that last wave that included the Aquat and should have been a wide release, but instead it had a very limited run. If you can find a Tager, I highly recommend it. It's a very well-detailed figure with a bunch of very useful parts. The color scheme and level of detail is great all the way around. I wish there was more attachment points on the torso, but otherwise the parts in it are very useful, and some really interesting detailed parts. The purple parts are again in that very rare color that the Gorm uses, but it also has that amazing head sculpt with multiple different plastics dual molded, as well as all the great shield hollows, the drill piece which is kind of hard to find, and also this piece in the middle. This piece is a very useful connector that's only in 2 Galidor sets. It is a connector that really allows you to do a lot more with the Galidor theme. I wish there were more like this, because then it allows you to make mocks a lot easier, connecting multiple things together. It uses this so well to create this drill assembly in the set, which is why I really wish this kind of part was included in more sets. So it's great that the Tager set uses it, and I wish the set had a wider release, so that more of these were in circulation. Making it to the top 3 is Nepal and Schimmel, one of the best sets for making general mocks. This set uses the accurate version of Nepal from the show, as well as finally including the Lucas staff, his weapon that's very important to the show's story. The Schimmel mount as well is featured in the show very briefly, but it looks incredible here and uses a bunch of very useful connectors in blue and medium blue, as well as a few unique parts. Overall, the set's finished model looks really good compared to a lot of the other ones, and it leaves a lot of room for you to make your own mocks. The part selection is really good. It reuses a decent amount of parts, but a lot of them are brand new or recolors for this set only. I especially like the inclusion of that new Lucas spear, as well as the new pieces for the Schimmel mount, the saddle, and the Shimmel's head and Nepal head. All these parts are very useful parts and they look great in other stuff, especially the shield hollows and the saddle. You can use them in mocks very easily outside of Galidor. The torso with multiple connections is such a useful piece, and this set really goes to show how good Galidor could be as a modular building system, something a lot of the sets don't show very well. It also means that as long as you have multiple copies of the set, you can already make some really interesting and impressive things with just a few extra parts. This is a very strong recommend, and it has a bunch of very useful pieces, and is a really strong set on its own. That's why the set is in the number 3 spot. You might not think so by looking at it, but the Uni is actually very close to being one of the best Galidor sets of all time. Despite the way that the set looks when it's finished, this is actually a very strong parts pack, which is always what the set was intended to be. The Uni isn't actually a creature in the show. Instead, it uses the head of the Bogue creature, and then includes the most useful recolors and new parts that they could. You can see this out of the box that this really could be anything that you want. Unlike the other figures, it isn't so stuck to the main form. In fact, this bug version I think is almost better than the one that they have on the front of the box. And it really goes to show how useful the parts in this are, that one of the B models looks better than the main model. Overall, the part selection in this is fantastic, with some great recolors, lots of connectors, mechanical and biological parts, as well as 6 new claw parts, which are set as exclusive in these 2 different colors, as well as new recolors of the Gorm head and Gorm arms. Other than the set exclusive Uni head and the new red hollow panels, these 3 connectors are what really makes the set special. These connectors allow so many opportunities to make new Galidor things. The 4-way connector was seen in the Tager, but this 2-way one is super useful, especially for smaller mocks, and is only in the set. Even though this set doesn't have a Bogue's alternate build or really a finished looking final form, the parts pack that this set provides is excellent. For the value that you can get the set at, it is a fundamental set for building anything Galidor themed, with a good part selection, with good colors. The Uni has to be an excellent indicator of the potential that Galidor had. Definitely more sets like this would have been made if the theme got more waves, and I really wish that there was more Uni out there. The best Galidor set demonstrates how the theme can work as both an action figure line and as a modular toy system. The Jens figure is incredibly detailed. Throughout the entire figure, it uses really useful colors and useful parts that you can use in mocks or as an extremely show-accurate version of the actual model. It's superposable, and it looks really good posed compared to figures like the Gorm and the Nick, as well as the fact that it lends itself very well to having duplicates of it, since it is a robotic character. In fact, the show-accurate version of Jens is almost perfect, and the inclusion of the welding arm and the features that the model itself has make this one of the best Galidor figures you can get. The part selection is fantastic, with these connectors having a light grey and dark grey side, so you have even more options for mocks with the parts included. The legs, which are used as the same as the module, are actually usable here, and the stirrups from Nipple and Schimmel in the head are used excellently here. The head has this incredible feature where you can turn the eye socket to move in and out, and you can turn the other side to make the hair spikes go up and down, just like in the show. This feature in such a small part is incredible, and the fact that this head is then also compatible with the Kek's Powerizer goes to show that this is really an incredibly well-engineered part. If you start building with Galidor for a while, you'll notice how useful the parts are, even down to the torso, which uses 7 different attachment points, and a bunch of mechanical detail, which allows you to embed it into so many useful mocks, from system to other Galidor creations. This set shows how well the theme could have done if it kept going, with useful parts for different types of mocks, as well as accurate figures to the show itself. This is a masterclass in the Galidor sets, and the best one to get. And that's my ranking. I hope you've enjoyed the video. It's just my thoughts based off of what I think is the most show accurate versus the most helpful parts and sets for mocks, and this is based off of just the last few years of collecting and creating things with the parts. This theme really should have more fans, and I hope that the more Galidor videos I make, the more people will find this weird theme from 2002. I definitely think that some of the sets get a bad rap compared to others, so hopefully I can shed some light on the benefits of these kind of sets. Overall, I'd love to make more videos on Galidor in the future, so if you have ideas or suggestions or your own ranking opinions, be sure to let me know, because this is slowly becoming one of my favorite themes. Thanks again for watching, everyone.